Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Setup. Jacob Silva had always been a man who solved problems with his mind, not his fists. Before the frame-up that landed him in Millfield Correctional, he'd been a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud investigations. His analytical nature and photographic memory had made him invaluable to law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Those same skills now kept him alive behind bars. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jacob Silva, the man who'd exposed dozens of financial criminals, was serving 5 years for a crime he didn't commit. The evidence against him had been meticulously fabricated: bank transfers, forged documents, witness testimonies that painted him as the mastermind behind a municipal pension fund theft. Someone had studied his methods and used them against him. Jacob suspected his former partner at the accounting firm, Alan Ferguson, had orchestrated the frame-up. Alan had always resented Jacob's success and the recognition he received. When Jacob got too close to discovering Alan's own embezzlement scheme, Alan struck first. But Jacob couldn't prove it yet. In his cell at night, Jacob would replay every detail of his case, mapping out the connections, building a mental dossier of everyone involved. He'd identified 3 key witnesses whose testimonies had sealed his fate, all of whom had suspiciously paid off their debts shortly after his conviction. The court-appointed attorney who'd barely put up a defense had received a promotion to district attorney 6 months later. The web of corruption was vast, but Jacob was patient. What kept him sane was his 8-year-old son, Bobby Silva. During weekly visits, Bobby would tell him about school, about his baseball games, about the drawings he'd made that covered Jacob's cell wall. Miranda Silva, Jacob's wife of 10 years, had initially stood by him. She believed in his innocence, mortgaged their house for legal fees, and promised to wait. But as months turned to years, her visits became less frequent. Jacob understood. The stigma of being married to a convicted felon was destroying her social life and career as a real estate agent. When she stopped bringing Bobby for visits, claiming it was too traumatic for a child, Jacob's heart broke. But he remained focused on his long-term goal: proving his innocence and exposing the truth. Jacob had cultivated relationships inside Millfield carefully. He helped inmates with legal paperwork, taught basic literacy, and most importantly, he listened. Information was currency in prison, and Jacob was wealthy. He knew which guards were corrupt, which inmates had connections on the outside, and which ones could be trusted. Among his closest allies was Ira Todd, a lifer who ran the prison library and had connections throughout the system. Ira had taken a liking to Jacob's intelligence and integrity. Then there was Nathan Schmidt, a former electronics expert, serving time for hacking government databases. Nathan had maintained contact with underground networks that could access information the legal system couldn't touch. Through Nathan's connections, Jacob had been slowly gathering evidence to overturn his conviction. Bank security footage that had mysteriously disappeared during his trial was recovered from backup servers. Email communications between Alan Ferguson and the key witnesses were reconstructed from deleted files. Jacob was building an airtight case for his appeal. The plan was simple: serve his time quietly, gather evidence, and emerge with both his freedom and the evidence needed to destroy those who destroyed him. Jacob had already served 3 years of his 5-year sentence. In 18 months, he'd be out, vindicated, and ready to reclaim his life. He never imagined that Vincent Hathaway would force his hand. Chapter 2, The Predator. Vincent Hathaway was everything Jacob Silva was not: impulsive, violent, and utterly without conscience. At 35, Vincent had spent more years inside correctional facilities than out. His rap sheet read like a catalog of human depravity: domestic violence, aggravated assault, armed robbery, and sexual assault charges that had been plea bargained down to lesser offenses. Vincent possessed a predator's instinct for identifying vulnerability. He targeted single mothers, recently divorced women, and anyone desperate enough to overlook his past in exchange for companionship. His method was always the same: initial charm, gradual isolation from friends and family, followed by psychological and physical domination. Miranda Silva became his latest victim 6 months after she stopped visiting Jacob in prison. Vincent had approached her at a real estate office, posing as a client interested in an expensive property. He was handsome in a rough way, with the kind of dangerous charm that made some women ignore obvious red flags. He claimed to be a successful contractor, flush with cash from a big commercial project. The truth was far darker. Vincent had recently been released from a 2-year stint for aggravated assault against his previous girlfriend. He was living in a roach-infested efficiency apartment, surviving on disability payments he'd fraudulently obtained by claiming a back injury. The expensive watch and clothes were stolen, the construction business was a lie, and the charm was a carefully crafted mask. Miranda, lonely and struggling financially after Jacob's legal fees had drained their savings, was vulnerable to Vincent's attention. He love-bombed her with expensive gifts, bought with stolen credit cards, lavish dinners, paid for with bad checks, and promises of a future where she wouldn't have to worry about money. Vincent moved into Jacob's house within 2 months of meeting Miranda. He immediately began asserting control. Miranda's friends noticed bruises she explained away as clumsiness. Her sister Adrienne Knapp tried to warn her, but Vincent had already begun the isolation process, convincing Miranda that her family was jealous of their happiness. Bobby Silva became Vincent's primary target for psychological torture. The 8-year-old reminded Vincent daily of Jacob's existence, a challenge to his dominance over Miranda. Vincent's abuse was calculated and cruel. He would destroy Bobby's toys, claiming they were baby stuff, then force the child to thank him for toughening him up. When Bobby cried for his father, Vincent would mock him as weak and pathetic. The physical abuse started small, a shove here, a slap there, always followed by apologies and promises that it wouldn't happen again. Vincent was careful to leave no visible marks, knowing that Miranda was already walking on thin ice with Child Protective Services due to Jacob's incarceration. Vincent's criminal network was extensive. He maintained connections with drug dealers, car thieves, and other violent offenders throughout the state. These weren't just criminal associates. They were Vincent's insurance policy. He'd learned early that reputation and fear were more valuable than money. Stories of his violence traveled through criminal circles, ensuring that few dared cross him. What made Vincent particularly dangerous was his intelligence. Despite his violent nature, he was cunning enough to avoid serious consequences for most of his crimes. He knew how to manipulate the legal system, how to intimidate witnesses, and how to exploit the bureaucratic gaps that allowed predators like him to slip through cracks. Vincent had researched Jacob thoroughly, viewing him as both a rival and a threat. He knew about Jacob's accounting background, his pending appeal, and his reputation for methodical planning. In Vincent's mind, Jacob represented everything he despised: intelligence, integrity, and the kind of man women respected rather than feared. The decision to target Bobby wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic psychological warfare designed to break Jacob's spirit and ensure Miranda's complete dependence on Vincent. If Jacob ever got out of prison, Vincent wanted him to find a broken family that blamed him for their suffering. Vincent began documenting his abuse through photos and videos, not out of sadism, though he enjoyed reliving the moments, but as leverage. If Miranda ever tried to leave, or if Jacob ever threatened him, Vincent had evidence that could be twisted to make Jacob look like the real danger to his own family. The car trunk incident wasn't the first time Vincent had trapped Bobby in confined spaces. It was simply the escalation that would prove to be his fatal mistake. Vincent's arrogance had led him to underestimate the man he was tormenting. Jacob Silva wasn't just any prisoner. He was a man with resources, connections, and nothing left to lose. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning during recreation time. Jacob was in the prison yard, going through his daily routine of calisthenics and mental exercises, when Ira Todd approached with a grim expression. "Silva, you got an emergency call. They're bringing you to the warden's office," Iris said quietly. "Whatever it is, keep your head. Don't let them see you break." Jacob's blood ran cold. Emergency calls in prison meant only one thing: someone was dead or dying. His mind immediately went to Bobby. He'd had nightmares about this moment, about being helpless behind bars while his son needed him. The walk to the warden's office felt endless. Jacob forced himself to breathe steadily, maintaining the calm facade that had kept him alive for 3 years. Warden Patricia Cooley was waiting with a prison phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. 5 minutes, Silva. Make it count, she said, handing him the receiver. Jacob. The voice was his sister-in-law, Adrian, but he'd never heard her sound so terrified. Jacob, you need to know what's happening. I've been trying to reach Miranda, but that monster won't let me talk to her. Adrian, slow down. What's wrong? Is Bobby okay? There was a pause, and Jacob heard her crying. No, he's not okay. None of this is okay. That piece of garbage Vincent has been hurting him. Jacob, I've seen the bruises. Miranda makes excuses, but I know abuse when I see it. Jacob's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. How bad? Today was the worst. I was driving by the house when I saw Bobby running down the street, screaming. Vincent had locked him in the trunk of his car and driven around the block at high speed, hitting every pothole and speed bump. When I confronted them, Vincent just laughed. He said Bobby needed to learn that his daddy couldn't save him. The world tilted around Jacob. His vision narrowed to a single point of white-hot rage, but his voice remained steady. Where is Bobby now? I took him to the hospital. He's got bruises all over his back and arms from being thrown around in that trunk. The doctor is calling child services, but you know how that goes. Vincent's smooth. He'll convince them it was an accident, and Bobby's too scared to tell the truth. And Miranda? She's completely under his control, Jacob. She's not the woman you married. She's afraid to breathe without his permission. I try to get her to leave with Bobby, but she won't. She says Vincent loves them, that he's just helping Bobby become a man. Jacob closed his eyes, processing the information with the analytical mind that had served him so well. Adrian, I need you to do something for me. There's a lawyer named Catherine Quinn in the city. Tell her Jacob Silva sent you. She's been working on my appeal. Give her everything, photos, medical records, whatever you can get. Tell her, I said to expedite everything. Jacob, what are you planning? He looked through the office window at the prison yard, where inmates were beginning to gather in unusual clusters. Word traveled fast in prison, and tension was building over something. Jacob had noticed it for days, whispered conversations, guards looking nervous, the subtle signs that preceded major incidents. I'm planning to be the father Bobby deserves, Jacob said simply. After the call ended, Warden Cooley studied Jacob's face. She'd been running prisons for 20 years and had seen that look before, the moment when a man decided he had nothing left to lose. Silva, whatever you're thinking, don't. You've got 18 months left. Don't throw your life away over something you can't control from in here. Jacob met her eyes. Ma'am, with respect, if I can't protect my 8-year-old son, what kind of life do I have to throw away? As he was escorted back to his cell, Jacob's mind was already working. Nathan Schmidt had mentioned increasing tensions between rival gangs in the prison. The Aryan Brotherhood and the Black Guerrilla family had been feuding over drug territory, and several recent incidents had pushed both sides toward open conflict. The guards were stretched thin, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before something erupted. That evening, Jacob sat with Ira and Nathan in the library, ostensibly playing chess, but really planning. I need out, Jacob said simply. Not permanently, just long enough to handle some business. Nathan raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of an ask, Silva. What's the situation? Jacob explained about Bobby, keeping his voice level and factual. Both men had children on the outside and understood the desperation of a helpless father. The gang situation's about to blow, Ira said thoughtfully. Rodriguez and Block C has been pushing for retaliation against the AB for that stabbing last week. If someone gave him the right information about guard rotations and surveillance blind spots. The West Gate, Nathan added. During a full lockdown, they pull guards from perimeter posts to control the blocks. 10-minute window, maybe 15 if it's bad enough. Jacob nodded. He'd already figured out the logistics. The question was whether he could live with the consequences. Starting a prison riot would result in injuries, possibly deaths. But Bobby was in immediate danger, and the legal system had already failed him once. "There's something else," Jacob said. "I've been building a case against the people who put me here. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it back, I need that evidence to reach the right people." Nathan pulled out a small piece of paper with an encrypted email address. "Dead Man's Switch. If you don't check in with a code word every 72 hours, everything gets sent to the FBI, State Attorney General, and 3 major news outlets simultaneously." Jacob memorized the address and ate the paper. "What's the code word?" "Bobby," Nathan said simply. The next morning, Jacob began implementing his plan. First, he passed information to Rodriguez about a planned AB weapons cache in a laundry facility. Information that was true but incomplete. He'd learned about it weeks ago, but had saved the knowledge for the right moment. Then he visited the commissary and made specific purchases. Over-the-counter pain medication, which could be concentrated into something more dangerous, and cleaning supplies that could create smoke when mixed properly. Everything appeared routine to casual observation. Finally, he sent a message through the prison network to Vincent Hathaway. The message was simple. "I know what you did to my son. We're going to have a conversation very soon." Jacob knew Vincent would dismiss the threat as the impotent rage of a helpless man. That arrogance would be Vincent's undoing. The riot began the next afternoon, exactly as Jacob had predicted. Rodriguez's crew hit the AB in the laundry room, sparking a brawl that quickly spread throughout the facility. Jacob had positioned himself in the yard when the alarm sounded, close enough to the west gate to make his move when the guards abandoned their posts. As chaos erupted around him, Jacob's sister-in-law's words echoed in his mind. "Your wife's new boyfriend locked your son in the car trunk, then drove the car on a rough road at 60 miles per hour, then dumped your son in the woods. He's laughing about it." The warden had seen Jacob's face when the riot started. She knew exactly what he was thinking. "There's a riot starting. The west gate will be unmanned for 10 minutes, she'd said, not quite meeting his eyes. Jacob understood. Even the warden had children. As he slipped through the unmanned gate into the woods beyond, Jacob Silva wasn't escaping for freedom. He was escaping for a funeral. Vincent Hathaway's. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. The first thing Jacob noticed about freedom was the silence. After 3 years of constant noise, slamming doors, shouting voices, industrial humming, the quiet of the forest felt surreal. He moved carefully through the dense undergrowth, using skills learned during his brief stint in the Army Reserve before college. Jacob had exactly 6 hours before his absence would be discovered during the evening count. By then, he needed to be either back inside or so far ahead of the manhunt that capture would be impossible. The plan was tight, with no margin for error. His first stop was a cache he'd arranged through Nathan's network, a waterproof container buried near a specific mile marker on the old logging road. Inside, he found civilian clothes, cash, a prepaid cell phone, and something more valuable than gold, a complete dossier on Vincent Hathaway. Nathan's hacker contacts had been thorough. The file contained Vincent's current address, vehicle information, criminal history, known associates, and most importantly, his patterns of behavior. Vincent was a creature of habit, and habits could be exploited. Jacob changed clothes quickly, burying his prison uniform in the same hole. The jeans and flannel shirt felt strange after years of institutional clothing, but they fit well. Everything had been planned to the smallest detail. The second cache was at an abandoned gas station 12 miles south. This required walking through rough terrain, but Jacob was in excellent physical condition. Prison had given him nothing but time to exercise and prepare his body for exactly this moment. At the gas station, Jacob found a motorcycle, a stolen Yamaha that Nathan's people had borrowed from a drug dealer who wouldn't be reporting it missing. The keys were hidden where specified, and the tank was full. Jacob had learned to ride motorcycles during his military service and had maintained his license, though Miranda had never known about this skill. The motorcycle gave Jacob speed and maneuverability that a car couldn't match. More importantly, it was harder to track and could access routes unavailable to four-wheeled vehicles. He had memorized a network of back roads, fire trails, and utility paths that would keep him invisible to law enforcement. His first objective was reconnaissance. Jacob needed to confirm Vincent's location and assess the tactical situation before making any moves. The dossier indicated that Vincent was currently unemployed, despite telling Miranda he was running a construction business, and spent most afternoons at Mickey's Tavern, a dive bar known for attracting ex-cons and lowlifes. Jacob positioned himself across the street from Mickey's, using a combination of shadow and parked cars for concealment. His forensic accounting training had taught him patience and observation skills that served him well now. He watched the bar for 2 hours, noting every person who entered and exited, memorizing vehicle license plates, and mapping escape routes. At 4:30 p.m., Vincent emerged from the bar, clearly intoxicated. He was accompanied by 2 other men whom Jacob recognized from the dossier, Jeremy Crawford and Bobby Heath, both violent felons with extensive criminal records. Vincent's criminal network was smaller than Jacob had expected, but these men were dangerous. Jacob followed at a distance as Vincent drove a battered pickup truck toward the house that had once been Jacob's home. The irony was bitter. Vincent was living in the house Jacob had purchased with his legitimate earnings, sleeping in Jacob's bed, terrorizing Jacob's son. The house was a modest 2-story colonial in a middle-class neighborhood. Jacob had chosen it specifically because it was in a good school district and felt safe for raising children. Now it had become Bobby's prison. Jacob conducted a careful surveillance of the property, noting that Vincent had made modifications, security cameras at the front door, new deadbolt locks, and what appeared to be bars on Bobby's bedroom window. The measures weren't for protection. They were for control. Vincent was keeping Bobby locked in his own home. As evening approached, Jacob saw Miranda's car pull into the driveway. She looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the confident woman he'd married. Behind her, Bobby climbed out slowly, moving like someone in pain. Even from a distance, Jacob could see the fear in his son's posture. The sight of his broken family filled Jacob with a cold rage that went beyond anger into something darker. Vincent Hathaway had stolen more than Jacob's freedom. He'd stolen his family's peace, his son's childhood, and his wife's spirit. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice that the legal system had failed to provide. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text message. Nathan had arranged for updates on the prison situation. The riot was under control, but several inmates had been hospitalized. Jacob's absence wouldn't be discovered for another 4 hours, giving him a narrow window to gather more intelligence. He circled the neighborhood, memorizing every detail. The house backed up to a small wooded area that connected to a drainage culvert. The neighbor to the left was an elderly widow who went to bed early. The neighbor to the right traveled frequently for business and was currently out of town. Vincent had unknowingly chosen the perfect location for what Jacob had planned. Jacob's military training had included basic reconnaissance and infiltration techniques. He'd never imagined using those skills to spy on his own home, but life had a way of preparing you for things you never expected to need. As Jacob prepared to leave, Bobby grabbed his arm. "Daddy, Vincent has a gun. He showed it to me and said he'd use it if you ever came back." This was valuable intelligence. Jacob had wondered if Vincent was armed, and now he knew. It also explained Vincent's confidence. He thought he had the ultimate advantage in any confrontation with Jacob. "Where does he keep it, son?" "In a box under his side of your bed. He checks it every night before he goes to sleep." Jacob processed this information quickly. A gun changed the tactical situation significantly, but it also provided opportunities. Vincent's overconfidence in his weapon could be turned against him. Before leaving Bobby's room, Jacob planted several microcameras in strategic locations. Nathan's hacker friends had provided surveillance equipment that was virtually undetectable. These would provide real-time monitoring of Vincent's activities and serve as evidence in court proceedings. The return journey through the house was even more dangerous. Jacob could hear Miranda crying softly in the master bedroom, and the sound filled him with complex emotions. Part of him still loved his wife, but she had chosen to bring this monster into their son's life. That choice had consequences. Back in the basement, Jacob discovered Vincent's most damning secret, a collection of videos documenting his abuse of Bobby and previous victims. The files were organized by date and victim, suggesting a pattern of predatory behavior spanning years. Some of the victims appeared to be other children, which elevated Vincent's crimes to an entirely different level. Jacob copied everything to portable storage devices while uploading originals to the cloud. This evidence would destroy Vincent's life and put him away forever. But it also revealed the scope of his criminal network and the number of victims who deserve justice. As dawn approached, Jacob had to make a critical decision. He could return to prison, serve out his remaining time, and pursue legal justice with the evidence he'd gathered. The safe, rational choice was to trust the system and let law enforcement handle Vincent. But the system had already failed Jacob once, and Bobby couldn't wait for bureaucratic justice. Vincent's escalating violence suggested that serious injury or death was imminent. Jacob had perhaps hours, not days, before Vincent crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jacob's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Nathan. Situation at prison stable. Your absence discovered, but attributed to riot confusion. 12-hour window before manhunt begins. 12 hours was enough time to finish what he'd started. Jacob had evidence to destroy Vincent legally, but he also had the opportunity to ensure that Vincent never hurt another child. The choice between justice and vengeance was no choice at all. As Jacob prepared to leave the house, he planted one final device, a listening device in Vincent's bedroom that would allow him to monitor conversations and predict Vincent's movements. Knowledge was power, and Jacob intended to have every possible advantage. Outside, the first hints of dawn were appearing on the horizon. Jacob had been free for 8 hours and had accomplished more than he'd dared hope. Vincent Hathaway's criminal empire was documented and ready for destruction. Now came the hard part, ensuring that Bobby would be safe before Jacob's temporary freedom ended. As he rode the motorcycle back to his temporary base of operations, Jacob felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: control. For the first time since his arrest, he was actively protecting his family instead of helplessly watching them suffer. Vincent Hathaway had made his last mistake when he decided to hurt Bobby Silva. Now he was going to learn what happened when someone threatened a father with nothing left to lose. Chapter 6: The Trap. Jacob's temporary base of operations was an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the state forest, chosen for its isolation and multiple escape routes. Nathan's network had supplied it with everything Jacob needed: secure communications equipment, weapons, and most importantly, high-speed internet access for coordinating his attack on Vincent's criminal empire. The first phase of Jacob's plan was already in motion. At 6 a.m., encrypted data packages began arriving at FBI field offices, state police headquarters, and the offices of 3 investigative journalists. Each package contained a complete dossier on Vincent Hathaway's criminal activities, including financial records, stolen merchandise inventories, and most damning of all, the videos of child abuse. But Jacob wasn't relying solely on law enforcement. He'd learned from his own experience that the system could be manipulated and corrupted. Vincent had connections and knew how to work the system. Direct action was necessary to ensure Bobby's immediate safety. Jacob's phone buzzed with a message from the listening device in Vincent's bedroom. Vincent was awake and angry about something. Through the audio feed, Jacob could hear him yelling at Miranda about missing alcohol and demanding to know if she'd been snooping around the basement. Miranda's terrified responses revealed just how completely Vincent controlled the household. She apologized repeatedly for things she hadn't done, promised to be more careful, and begged Vincent not to take his anger out on Bobby. The psychological abuse was as devastating as the physical violence. Jacob activated the cameras he'd planted in Bobby's room and felt his heart clench. His son was awake, but lying perfectly still, listening to Vincent's rage and trying to make himself invisible. Bobby had learned that any sound or movement during Vincent's outbursts could redirect the violence toward him. The GPS tracker Jacob had given Bobby showed that his son was still in the house, but the device also had a hidden feature. It was recording audio and transmitting the data to Jacob's location. Every threat, every moment of terror was being documented as evidence. At 7 a.m., Jacob received confirmation that the first phase was working. Catherine Quinn called the secure phone number Nathan had provided. "Jacob, whatever you've done, it's working." The FBI is taking this seriously. They've issued warrants for Vincent's arrest on federal charges: child abuse, identity theft, interstate trafficking of stolen goods. Local police have warrants for aggravated assault and child endangerment. How long before they execute the warrants? That's the problem. These things take time to coordinate. Federal and local jurisdictions are arguing over who has priority. Vincent could have days to realize what's happening and run. Jacob had anticipated this delay. Bureaucracy moved slowly, but danger moved fast. Catherine, I need you to do something. Contact Child Protective Services immediately. Use the emergency provisions to get Bobby removed from that house today. Based on what evidence? I can't just. You'll have new evidence within the hour. Medical records, photographs, video documentation. Everything you need to justify emergency removal. Jacob ended the call and activated the next phase of his plan. The micro cameras would provide real-time evidence of Vincent's behavior, but Jacob needed to trigger a situation that would demonstrate the immediate danger to Bobby. Using a spoof phone number, Jacob called Vincent directly. As darkness fell, Jacob positioned himself in the wooded area behind the house. Through the kitchen window, he could see Vincent drinking beer and watching television. Miranda was preparing dinner with mechanical precision, her movements suggesting someone going through familiar motions while mentally absent. Bobby was nowhere visible, which meant he was likely confined to his room. The bars on the window confirmed Jacob's worst fears. His son wasn't just being abused, he was being imprisoned. Jacob's phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Catherine Quinn, the lawyer working on his appeal. Adrian brought me everything. We have enough to file for emergency custody and press charges against Vincent. But without you present to testify, it's difficult to proceed. Jacob typed back carefully, "Proceed anyway. File everything immediately. Evidence package will be available soon." He knew Catherine would understand the implications. Jacob was giving her permission to move forward with a legal challenge, regardless of his current situation. If he didn't survive the next few days, at least Bobby would have legal protection. The final piece of reconnaissance was the most dangerous. Jacob needed to get inside the house to assess Bobby's condition and gather evidence of Vincent's abuse. But first, he had one more stop to make. Using the motorcycle, Jacob rode to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 247 was rented under a false name that Nathan's people had provided. Inside, Jacob found everything he'd requested: night vision equipment, zip ties, a taser, and most importantly, a digital camera with telephoto lens. Jacob wasn't planning to kill Vincent with his bare hands. That would be too quick and wouldn't address the larger problem. Vincent was part of a network of predators who had learned to game the system. Taking down Vincent alone wouldn't protect the next family he targeted. No, Jacob had something more comprehensive in mind. He was going to dismantle Vincent's entire operation, expose his criminal network, and ensure that the evidence would stand up in court. But first, he needed to document everything. As he prepared his equipment, Jacob thought about Bobby's terrified voice on the phone with Adrian. His son had been counting on him for protection, and Jacob had failed because he was locked away for a crime he didn't commit. That failure ended tonight. Jacob Silva had spent 3 years being patient, gathering evidence, and working within a system that had betrayed him. Now, he was going to show Vincent Hathaway what happened when someone threatened his family. The hunter had become the hunted. Chapter 5: Evidence and Escalation. Jacob waited until 2 a.m. before making his approach to the house. Vincent's truck was still in the driveway, and all the lights were off except for a flickering glow from the television in the living room. The security cameras were older models with predictable blind spots that Jacob had already mapped. Getting inside required patience and precision. Jacob had noticed that the basement window on the east side of the house had a faulty latch, something he'd been meaning to fix before his arrest. Now that neglect would serve his purposes. The basement was exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago, except for the addition of several cases of stolen merchandise that Vincent was obviously fencing. Jacob recognized electronics still in their original packaging, power tools with suspicious serial numbers filed off, and boxes of designer clothing with store security tags still attached. Jacob photographed everything, building a comprehensive record of Vincent's criminal enterprise. Each image was automatically uploaded to an encrypted cloud storage account that Nathan had established. Even if Jacob was captured or killed, the evidence would survive. Moving upstairs required extraordinary care. Jacob knew every creaking board in his own house, but 3 years had allowed settling and changes. He tested each step carefully, pausing frequently to listen for any sign that he'd been detected. The living room revealed more evidence of Vincent's criminal activities. On the coffee table, Jacob found documents related to identity theft, fake driver's licenses, stolen credit cards, and what appeared to be a ledger tracking fraudulent transactions. Vincent wasn't just a violent predator. He was running a sophisticated criminal operation from Jacob's home. More photos went to the cloud storage. Jacob was building a case that would put Vincent away for decades, assuming the legal system functioned properly this time. The most difficult part was reaching Bobby's room without alerting Vincent and Miranda, whose bedroom was directly adjacent. Jacob could hear Vincent's snoring through the thin walls, a sound that filled him with barely contained rage. This monster was sleeping peacefully while Bobby lived in terror. Bobby's door was locked from the outside, confirming Jacob's suspicions about imprisonment. The lock was new, installed by Vincent as another layer of control. Jacob picked it carefully, using skills learned from a reformed burglar he'd befriended in prison. Inside, Jacob's heart nearly broke. Bobby was sleeping fitfully on a mattress on the floor. His proper bed had been removed, along with most of his toys and books. The room was sparse and cold, more like a cell than a child's bedroom. But it was the sight of his son's injuries that nearly shattered Jacob's careful control. Even in the dim light, he could see bruises on Bobby's arms and back. The 8-year-old was sleeping in a defensive position, curled up with his arms protecting his head. Jacob knelt beside his son and gently touched his shoulder. Bobby's eyes snapped open in terror before recognition dawned. "Daddy?" Bobby's whisper was barely audible, filled with disbelief and desperate hope. "I'm here, son. I'm going to fix this." Bobby sat up carefully, wincing from pain. "Vincent said you were never coming back. He said you didn't love us anymore." Jacob pulled his son into a careful embrace, feeling the fragile, bird-like bones beneath skin that should have been healthy and strong. "That man is a liar, Bobby. I love you more than anything in the world, and I'm going to make sure he never hurts you again." "He locked me in the car trunk yesterday," Bobby whispered. "It was dark and scary, and I couldn't breathe good. He said it was to make me tough like him." Jacob photographed Bobby's injuries while explaining what he was doing. "These pictures are evidence, son. They're going to help put Vincent in prison where he belongs." "Can I come with you, Daddy?" The question nearly destroyed Jacob's resolve. Every instinct screamed to grab his son and run. But he knew that would make them both fugitives and wouldn't address the underlying problem. Vincent would just find another victim, and Miranda would be left to face his rage alone. "Not yet, Bobby, but very soon. I promise you that in a few days, you'll never have to see Vincent again. Can you be brave for just a little longer?" Bobby nodded solemnly. "I can be brave if you're coming back." Jacob gave his son a small device that looked like a toy, but was actually a GPS tracker and emergency beacon. "If Vincent hurts you again before I can stop him, press the red button. Help will come immediately." "Who is this?" Vincent's voice was already aggressive, primed for conflict. "Someone who knows what you've been doing to that little boy," Jacob said, disguising his voice with a digital modifier. "The FBI knows about your operation. They know about the stolen goods, the fake IDs, and the videos." Vincent's silence lasted several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. Check your basement, Vincent. See if everything's where you left it." Jacob ended the call and watched through the cameras as Vincent rushed downstairs. The live feed showed Vincent discovering that his criminal merchandise had been photographed and some items had been moved. Vincent understood immediately that his operation had been compromised. What happened next confirmed Jacob's worst fears about Vincent's capacity for violence. Instead of fleeing or destroying evidence, Vincent's first instinct was to take out his rage on the most vulnerable target available. Through the audio feed, Jacob heard Vincent storming upstairs, kicking open Bobby's door and grabbing the child roughly. "Your father thinks he's smart?" Vincent's voice was filled with venom. "Let's see how smart he feels when he knows what happened to his precious son." Bobby's terrified, crying came through the audio feed clearly. Vincent was dragging him downstairs, probably toward the basement. Jacob knew with horrible certainty that Vincent intended to use Bobby as leverage, or worse, as a victim for his escalating rage. Jacob was already on the motorcycle before Vincent finished speaking. The cabin was 12 miles from the house, but Jacob knew every shortcut and back road. If he pushed the bike to its limits and took calculated risks, he could be there in 15 minutes. But 15 minutes might be too long. Jacob activated the emergency beacon function on Bobby's GPS tracker. This would alert Child Protective Services, local police, and Catherine Quinn simultaneously. Multiple agencies would respond, but their response time was unpredictable. As Jacob raced through the forest roads, he made a series of rapid phone calls. The first was to Ira Todd at the prison. "Ira, I need the network to do something. There's about to be a situation at my house. I need the emergency services response time slowed down just enough for me to get there first." "How long do you need?" 20 minutes. "Can you buy me that much time?" "Consider it done. False emergency calls will tie up dispatch. You'll have your window." The second call was to Nathan's hacker contacts. "I need a favor. Can you trigger every security alarm in a 6-block radius around this address? Police, fire, medical, everything at once. That's going to create chaos. That's the point. I need confusion and misdirection while I handle something." Jacob's plan was taking shape. By overwhelming emergency services with false alarms and conflicting calls, he would create enough confusion to buy time for a direct intervention. It was risky and probably illegal, but Bobby's life was worth any consequence. The final call was to Miranda's cell phone. When she answered, her voice was shaking with terror. "Jacob, how are you calling me?" Vincent said. "Miranda, listen to me very carefully. Take Bobby and get out of that house right now. Don't argue, don't pack anything. Just grab our son and run." "I can't. Vincent has Bobby. He says if I try to leave, he'll hurt him worse." Jacob's blood turned to ice. "Where are they?" "The basement. Vincent's talking crazy, saying someone's coming for him. He has his gun, Jacob. He's not making sense anymore." Jacob could hear shouting in the background, along with Bobby's crying. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Miranda, I'm coming. Keep Vincent talking. Keep him focused on you instead of Bobby. Help is coming, but I need you to buy me time. You're in prison." "How can you?" "I'm not in prison anymore. I'll be there in 10 minutes. As Jacob spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the neighborhood. Security systems, fire alarms, and emergency beacons created a cacophony of noise that would confuse and overwhelm any coordinated response. In the chaos, one more alarm would go unnoticed. Jacob reached the edge of his neighborhood just as police cars were racing past him toward false emergencies scattered across the city. His distraction had worked perfectly, giving him the clear field he needed. As he approached the house, Jacob could see Vincent's truck still in the driveway, but the garage door was open. Vincent was preparing to run, probably with Bobby as a hostage. The situation was reaching its crisis point. Jacob parked the motorcycle in the woods and approached on foot, carrying the equipment he'd prepared. He had tasers, zip ties, night vision equipment, and most importantly, a clear plan for ending Vincent Hathaway's reign of terror. Through the basement window, Jacob could see Vincent waving his gun while screaming at Miranda. Bobby was tied to a chair in the corner, his face streaked with tears, but his expression showing the kind of courage that made Jacob's heart swell with pride. Vincent Hathaway had made his choice. He decided to become a threat to Jacob's family. Now, Jacob was going to show him the consequences of that decision. The trap was set. The hunter was in position, and Vincent had nowhere left to run. Chapter 7. Confrontation. Jacob had 3 advantages that Vincent didn't know about: complete knowledge of the house layout, night vision equipment, and the element of surprise. Vincent thought he was dealing with unknown enemies closing in from outside. He had no idea that his most dangerous opponent was already inside his perimeter. The basement had 2 entrances. the main stairway, and an exterior bulkhead that Jacob had installed years ago for emergency access. Vincent was focused on the main entrance, positioning himself where he could watch both the stairs and keep Bobby in his line of fire. He'd chosen the tactically sound position for defending against external threats. But Jacob wasn't coming from outside. Using the bulkhead entrance, Jacob descended into the basement silently. Years of renovating the space had taught him every creaking board and structural weak point. He moved like a ghost through the darkness, positioning himself behind Vincent's improvised barricade. Through the night vision scope, Jacob could see the situation clearly. Vincent had Miranda zip-tied to a water pipe near the furnace. Bobby was bound to a chair approximately 10 feet away. Vincent himself was crouched behind an overturned table, gun pointed toward the stairway. What Vincent couldn't see was Jacob positioned behind him with a clear shot using the taser. But Jacob hesitated. The smart play was to incapacitate Vincent immediately and call for backup. With Vincent unconscious, the immediate threat would be neutralized and authorities could handle the legal proceedings. Yet something held Jacob back. 3 years of helpless rage. 3 years of knowing that his son was suffering while he sat in a prison cell for crimes he didn't commit. Vincent Hathaway represented every corrupt official, every false witness, every person who had stolen Jacob's life and terrorized his family. Vincent chose that moment to demonstrate why he deserved no mercy. "You hear that, kid?" Vincent said to Bobby, his voice casual despite the desperate situation. "That's your daddy's friends coming to rescue you. But here's what's going to happen. When they get down here, I'm going to put a bullet in your head and tell them it was an accident. Maybe I'll shoot your mother too, just to be thorough." Bobby's tear-streaked face showed pure terror, but also something else, defiance. Despite being 8 years old and tied to a chair, Jacob's son refused to break under Vincent's threats. "My daddy's going to stop you," Bobby said quietly. "He promised." Vincent laughed, a sound devoid of humanity. "Your daddy's a convict, kid. A loser who couldn't even stay out of prison long enough to protect his own family. He's probably getting beaten up by real criminals right now, while I decide whether to kill you quickly or take my time." Jacob's hesitation evaporated. Vincent had just threatened to murder an 8-year-old child in cold blood. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about stopping a monster who would never stop hurting innocent people. Jacob activated the taser and struck Vincent in the back. 50,000 volts dropped the predator instantly, his gun clattering across the concrete floor. Vincent convulsed and fell, temporarily paralyzed by the electrical shock. Jacob moved quickly, zip-tying Vincent's hands and feet before the man could recover. Then he retrieved Vincent's gun, checking the chamber and engaging the safety. The weapon was loaded and ready to fire. Vincent had been serious about his threats. "Daddy!" Bobby's voice was filled with relief and disbelief. Jacob freed his son first, checking for new injuries and finding only psychological trauma. Bobby clung to him with desperate strength, finally safe in his father's arms. "It's over, son. You're safe now." Miranda was in shock, staring at Jacob as if he were a hallucination. "How are you here?" "The prison called yesterday and said you were in solitary confinement for fighting." Jacob freed her restraints while explaining briefly. "I escaped during a riot. I had to protect Bobby." As Vincent began to regain consciousness, Jacob positioned himself where the bound man could see him clearly. "Vincent Hathaway, we need to have that conversation now." Vincent's eyes focused slowly, confusion giving way to rage as he realized his situation. "You're dead, Silva. Will my friends find out what you did?" "Your friends are busy," Jacob interrupted. "Jeremy Crawford was arrested an hour ago on outstanding warrants. Bobby Heath is in federal custody for interstate transportation of stolen goods. Your entire network is being rolled up by law enforcement as we speak." Jacob pulled out a tablet showing federal booking photos and arrest records. Vincent's associates were indeed being systematically arrested based on the evidence Jacob had provided. "Ow!" Vincent's voice was smaller now, the reality of his situation sinking in. "You made a mistake when you hurt my son. You thought you were dealing with some helpless convict, but you forgot something important. I'm very good at finding hidden information. Every crime you've committed, every victim you've abused, every stolen item you've fenced. It's all documented and in the hands of federal investigators. Jacob showed Vincent photos from the man's own collection of abuse videos. Especially these. Child pornography carries federal sentences that make your previous convictions look like traffic tickets. Vincent's face went white as he understood the scope of the evidence against him. You can't prove I made those videos. I don't have to. Your fingerprints are on the camera equipment. Your DNA is on items found with the victims. And most damning of all, you were stupid enough to keep detailed records of your crimes. Jacob pulled out printouts of Vincent's own ledgers, showing dates, victim names, and activities. You documented everything, Vincent. You kept trophies. You created evidence that will put you away for the rest of your life. Miranda was listening to this exchange with growing horror. Vincent, what is he talking about? What videos? Vincent tried to salvage the situation. Miranda, he's lying. He's trying to turn you against me. None of this is real. Jacob showed Miranda one of the photographs from Vincent's collection. Bobby tied to a chair while Vincent held a knife to his throat. This was taken in your house 3 days ago, Miranda. Look at the timestamp. Miranda's hand flew to her mouth as she saw the image. Oh my God, Bobby, he did this to you. Bobby nodded solemnly. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt you too. The betrayal in Miranda's eyes was complete. She defended Vincent, made excuses for his behavior, and allowed him access to her son. Now she understood the full extent of what she'd enabled. Vincent's facade crumbled as he realized he'd lost his last ally. Miranda, you don't understand. I love you. I was protecting Bobby, teaching him to be strong. By terrorizing him, Miranda's voice was rising. By putting him in car trunks and threatening to kill him. Jacob handed Miranda his phone. The police are on their way. The FBI is also coming. Vincent is going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison, but I need you to understand something. Miranda looked at him with a mixture of guilt and confusion. I'm going back to prison tonight, Jacob continued. My escape was temporary, just long enough to save Bobby. But you have to promise me that you'll never again allow someone like Vincent near our son. Jacob, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You knew enough. You saw the bruises. You heard Bobby crying. You chose to believe Vincent's lies instead of protecting our child. Miranda began crying, the weight of her complicity finally hitting her. What can I do? How can I fix this? Testify against Vincent. Tell the truth about everything you witnessed. I'll put him away forever so he can't hurt any other children. Jacob heard sirens approaching, real ones this time, not the false alarms his network had generated. His temporary freedom was ending, but his mission was complete. Vincent made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. Silva, you think you've won? You're going back to prison as an escaped convict. They'll add years to your sentence. Your son will grow up visiting his father through bulletproof glass. Jacob smiled grimly. Vincent, you still don't understand. I have enough evidence to overturn my original conviction. The people who framed me are being arrested as we speak. I'll be out legally within 6 months. That's impossible. Alan Ferguson confessed this morning. Faced with evidence of his embezzlement scheme and your criminal network, he decided to cooperate with federal investigators. He's testifying against everyone involved in framing me. Jacob had saved this revelation for last. Vincent's operation had been connected to Alan's corruption through money laundering services. Taking down Vincent had exposed the entire conspiracy that had destroyed Jacob's life. As police entered the basement, Jacob placed his hands behind his head in the classic surrender position. Officers, I'm Jacob Silva. I'm surrendering voluntarily. The suspect is secured and disarmed. There are children present who need medical attention. Vincent Hathaway's reign of terror was over. Justice was finally being served, and Bobby Silva would never again have to fear the monster who had terrorized him. Jacob was going back to prison, but this time it would be temporary. His family was safe, his enemies were exposed, and his freedom was guaranteed. The father had kept his promise to his son. Chapter 8, Justice Served. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Jacob had orchestrated. Within hours of Vincent's arrest, the full scope of his criminal enterprise became clear to investigators. The evidence Jacob had gathered was so comprehensive that Vincent's public defender immediately began negotiating a plea agreement to avoid the death penalty. Jacob was processed as an escaped prisoner, but his status was complicated by the ongoing investigation into his original conviction. Catherine Quinn had filed emergency motions based on Alan Ferguson's confession and the evidence Nathan's network had provided. The media attention surrounding Vincent's arrest had also cast new light on Jacob's case. During his brief return to Millfield Correctional, Jacob found that his reputation had evolved. Word of his escape and successful rescue of his son had spread throughout the prison population. Even hardened criminals respected a father who would risk everything to protect his child. Warden Cooley called Jacob to her office on his third day back. "Silva, I'm going to speak plainly. What you did was illegal, dangerous, and should result in additional charges that would keep you here for years longer than your original sentence." Jacob nodded. "I understand, ma'am. However, the circumstances were extraordinary. You prevented serious harm to a child, exposed a criminal network that was operating under our noses, and provided evidence that led to multiple arrests of dangerous predators." The warden placed a file on her desk. "Alan Ferguson's confession has been corroborated by digital evidence and witness testimony. The state attorney general is recommending that your conviction be overturned and all charges dropped. The people who framed you are facing federal charges for conspiracy, perjury, and obstruction of justice." Jacob felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he'd carried for 3 years. "When the paperwork is being processed now, barring any complications, you should be released within 72 hours. All charges dropped, record expunged, and the state will likely offer a substantial settlement for wrongful imprisonment." "And the escape charges?" Warden Cooley's expression was unreadable. "What escape? According to our records, you were transferred to administrative segregation during the riot for your own protection. Any absence from your cell was due to administrative confusion during a chaotic situation." Jacob understood. The official record would show no escape, which meant no additional charges. The system was protecting itself by protecting him, and he was grateful for their pragmatism. "Ma'am, I need to ask about Vincent Hathaway's situation. He's been charged with federal crimes in 3 states: child pornography, human trafficking, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. The prosecution is seeking life without parole. Given the evidence you provided, conviction is virtually certain." Jacob nodded with satisfaction. Vincent would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, where child abusers receive the kind of justice that courtrooms couldn't provide. "There's something else," the warden continued. "Your wife filed for divorce 3 days ago. She's claiming mental duress and seeking full custody of your son. This wasn't unexpected, but it still stung." "I see. However, Child Protective Services has recommended supervised visitation for her and full custody consideration for you, given her poor judgment in exposing your son to a known predator. Your lawyer thinks you have an excellent chance of winning primary custody." Jacob had mixed feelings about Miranda's betrayal. Part of him still loved the woman he'd married, but that woman had made choices that endangered their son. Bobby's safety had to come first. What about Bobby? How is he handling everything? According to the social worker's reports, he's resilient but traumatized. He's been asking when his father is coming home. The boy clearly sees you as his protector. Jacob's phone privileges had been restored as part of the administrative review of his case. That evening, he called Bobby, who was staying with Adrian during the investigation. "Daddy, are you really coming home soon?" "Very soon, son. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "Aunt Adrian is taking good care of me. She made pancakes for breakfast, and we played video games. She says Vincent can never hurt me again." "That's right, Bobby. Vincent is going to prison for a very long time. You'll never have to see him again." "Good. I was scared he would come back." Jacob's heart clenched at the fear in his son's voice. "Bobby, I want you to know that you were very brave. You helped me stop Vincent by being strong and smart. I pressed the red button like you told me. Did that help?" "It helped very much. You did exactly the right thing." Jacob spent an hour talking with his son, reassuring him and planning for their reunion. Bobby was clearly damaged by his ordeal, but the resilience in his voice suggested that he would recover with time and proper support. The next morning brought news that Vincent's criminal network had been completely dismantled. Jeremy Crawford had been found dead in his cell, apparently killed by other inmates who learned about his crimes against children. Bobby Heath had agreed to testify against Vincent in exchange for a reduced sentence. Most satisfying was the news about Alan Ferguson. Jacob's former partner had been arrested at his country club while playing golf with 2 judges and a congressman. The corruption scandal was expanding beyond Jacob's case to include dozens of other wrongful convictions and manipulated legal proceedings. Catherine Quinn visited Jacob on his final day at Millfield. Jacob, the state is offering a settlement of $2.5 million for wrongful imprisonment. They want this to go away quietly. What do you recommend? Take it. Fight for custody of Bobby. Use the money to start over somewhere safe. You've been through enough, and Bobby needs stability. Jacob agreed. Money couldn't restore the 3 years he'd lost, but it could provide security for Bobby's future. His son would be able to attend good schools, receive therapy for his trauma, and never worry about financial security. On his release day, Jacob walked out of Millfield Correctional to find a crowd of reporters waiting. The story of his escape and rescue of his son had captured public attention, and many people viewed him as a hero rather than a criminal. Jacob gave a brief statement. I did what any father would do to protect his child. I'm grateful to law enforcement for their thorough investigation and to the justice system for correcting a terrible mistake. My focus now is on helping my son heal and building a better future for our family. Bobby was waiting in Adrienne's car, and a reunion was everything Jacob had dreamed about during his 3 years of imprisonment. His son launched himself into Jacob's arms with desperate joy, finally safe with the father who had promised to protect him. I knew you'd come back for me, Daddy. I'll always come back for you, son. That's a promise I'll never break. As they drove away from the prison, Jacob reflected on everything that had happened. Vincent Hathaway was facing life in prison. Alan Ferguson and his co-conspirators were being prosecuted for their crimes. Bobby was safe, and Jacob was free to be the father his son deserved. Justice had been served, both legal and personal. The system had failed Jacob once, but he'd proven that a father's love could overcome any obstacle. Vincent had made the mistake of threatening Jacob's family, and he'd paid the ultimate price for that error. The war was over, and Jacob Silva had won. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months after his release, Jacob stood in the kitchen of their new house, watching Bobby play in the backyard with their neighbor's children. The sound of his son's laughter, genuine, carefree laughter, was still music to Jacob's ears after years of silence. The house was in a small town called Millbrook, 3 hours from their old life. Jacob had chosen it specifically for its excellent schools, low crime rate, and the kind of community where everyone looked out for each other's children. Bobby was thriving in his new environment, though he still saw a therapist twice a week to work through his trauma. Jacob's settlement money had been invested wisely, providing financial security for generations. He'd also used part of it to establish a foundation that helped wrongfully convicted prisoners and supported children who'd been victims of domestic violence. Vincent Hathaway had unknowingly contributed to protecting other children from predators like himself. The morning news was playing on the kitchen television, and Jacob paused when he heard a familiar name. Vincent Hathaway, the convicted child predator whose case exposed a widespread corruption scandal, was found dead in his cell at Federal Correctional Institution Coleman. Prison officials report that Hathaway was killed by fellow inmates who had learned details of his crimes against children. He was serving 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Jacob felt no satisfaction at Vincent's death, only relief that the monster could never hurt another child. Prison justice was swift and final for those who preyed on the innocent. The corruption scandal that Vincent's arrest had exposed was still making headlines. Alan Ferguson had received a 20-year sentence for his role in multiple wrongful convictions. 2 judges had been impeached and removed from office. The congressman who'd been taking bribes had resigned in disgrace. Most importantly for Jacob, 17 other wrongfully convicted prisoners had been exonerated based on evidence of corruption in their cases. The foundation Jacob had established was helping them rebuild their lives and seek justice for the years they'd lost. Bobby ran inside, sweaty and happy from playing outside. "Dad, can Tommy come over for dinner?" His mom said it's okay if you say yes. "Of course, son. I'll call his mother and arrange it." Bobby had stopped calling him Daddy a few months ago, declaring that he was too old for baby names. Jacob missed it, but respected his son's growing independence. Bobby was becoming confident and strong, no longer the terrified child who'd cowered in Vincent's presence. The therapy was working. Dr. Sarah Morrison had explained that children were remarkably resilient when given proper support and stability. Bobby still had nightmares occasionally, but they were becoming less frequent. He'd learned to express his feelings in healthy ways and was developing the emotional tools he'd need for the rest of his life. Miranda had visitation rights every other weekend, but she rarely exercised them. The guilt of what she'd allowed to happen to Bobby had devastated her, and she'd struggled with alcohol and depression. Jacob hoped she would eventually get the help she needed, but his priority was protecting Bobby from further instability. "Dad, I made something for you at school," Bobby said, handing Jacob a handmade card. Inside, Bobby had written in careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Thank you for saving me. You're the best dad in the world. I love you." Jacob knelt down and hugged his son tightly. "I love you too, Bobby. More than you'll ever know." "I know, Dad. That's why you came to get me." Jacob's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Catherine Quinn calling with updates on the Foundation's work. "Jacob, we got good news. The Peterson case in Michigan. The evidence we provided has led to charges being dropped. They'll be released next week after 8 years of wrongful imprisonment." "That's wonderful news. What about his family situation?" "His wife divorced him while he was inside, but his children want to reconnect. We're arranging counseling and financial support to help with the transition." Jacob had learned that his experience wasn't unique. The system failed people regularly, and those failures destroyed families and lives. His foundation was working to prevent future injustices while helping victims of past corruption. "There's something else," Catherine continued. "The Department of Justice wants to hire you as a consultant. They're creating a new unit to investigate wrongful convictions, and they want someone with your expertise and experience to help design their protocols." Jacob considered the offer. It would mean traveling and time away from Bobby, but it would also mean preventing other families from experiencing what they'd gone through. "Let me think about it. Bobby's stability has to come first. Of course, they're willing to work around your schedule and base the position here in Millbrook. You can make a real difference, Jacob." After ending the call, Jacob found Bobby setting up a board game in the living room. This had become their evening ritual: homework, dinner, and then games or reading together before bedtime. "Dad, what was that phone call about?" Jacob had always been honest with Bobby about age-appropriate topics. "Some people want me to help them fix problems with the justice system, to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to other families." Bobby considered this seriously. "You mean help other kids like me?" "Exactly like that. I think you should do it. Other kids need their dads to come home too." Jacob smiled at his son's wisdom. Bobby had experienced trauma that no child should endure, but he'd also learned empathy and compassion that many adults never developed. "You're right, son. I think I will." As they played their game, Jacob reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 3 years ago, he'd been a man who believed in rules, systems, and institutional justice. Vincent Hathaway had taught him that sometimes those systems failed, and sometimes a father had to take matters into his own hands. Jacob had paid a price for his choices: 3 years of imprisonment, a destroyed marriage, and trauma that would affect his family forever. But he'd also learned something valuable. Love was stronger than any system, and a father's duty to protect his children transcended any law or regulation. "Dad," Bobby looked up from the game board. "Do you ever think about Vincent?" Jacob paused, considering his answer carefully. "Sometimes." "Do you?" "Sometimes I have dreams about him. But Dr. Morrison says that's normal and it'll get better." She's right. "And remember, Vincent can never hurt you again. He's gone forever." "I know, and I know you'll always protect me." "That's a promise, son." As they finished their game and prepared for bedtime, Jacob thought about the future. Bobby would grow up knowing that his father had fought for him when it mattered most. The boy would carry that knowledge with him throughout his life, understanding that love sometimes required difficult choices. Vincent Hathaway had set out to destroy Jacob's family. Instead, he'd made them stronger. Jacob and Bobby had survived their ordeal together, and their bond was unbreakable. The foundation would help other families survive similar trials. The consulting work with the Department of Justice would help prevent future injustices. And most importantly, Bobby Silva would grow up safe, loved, and confident. Jacob tucked his son into bed and kissed his forehead. "Sweet dreams, Bobby." "Good night, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, son." As Jacob turned out the lights and headed to his own room, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. The war was over, justice had been served, and his family was whole again. Vincent Hathaway had learned too late that some bonds couldn't be broken by threats or violence. A father's love for his child was stronger than any prison, more dangerous than any weapon, and more enduring than any criminal's reign of terror. Jacob Silva had kept his promise to his son, and that was all that mattered. In the quiet of their new home, father and son slept safely, knowing that the monsters were gone and tomorrow would bring new possibilities for their healing family. The end of one nightmare had become the beginning of a new dream. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.